Hi friends, welcome to the All Canadian Reptile Girl. I'm Annaliese, and I'm gonna steal a bit from Call Me Chris and tell you that you look very hot today. Come to think of it, I do too. But that's actually probably more to do with us being mammals and not reptiles. You see, today we are diving into the cool and yet somehow hot world of thermoregulation. That's right, we are talking about how cold-blooded reptiles manage to stay just the right temperature without all that fancy human stuff like sweat, shivers, or a handy thermostat that you should totally be trusted to adjust, but your dad won't let you when he can wear shorts out in the snow and he doesn't have problems with getting cold, and he was outside earlier today when it's snowing, by the way. You were outside, barefoot, in shorts, and a tank top, feeding squirrels. But no, I'm not allowed to touch the thermostat, whatever.
Are you okay?
Let's get started.
Jesus.
So first off, let's talk about the term cold-blooded. It's a wildly inaccurate term. Reptiles don't have ice in their veins or anything like that. Well, except maybe garter snakes, viviparous lizards, and some turtles, and Madeline Wunsch if you're talking to Captain Holt.
I will never trust Madeline Wunsch. She's a venomous snake waiting to strike, and you know what we do to snakes.
Chop their heads off, remove the skin, turn them into boots.
Don't be absurd. Who would want troll skin boots?
You just said she was a snake.
The devil comes in many forms.
They can actually partially freeze and be a-okay, but that's so that they can survive winters, and this is a tangent, so go here if you want to learn more. Where was I? Oh yeah, right, okay. Reptiles aren't really cold-blooded. At least, not all the time. In fact, sometimes they are actually more hot-blooded than we are. The colloquial term cold-blooded refers to the fact that reptiles, well, most reptiles, I'll get to more of that in a minute, don't generate their own body heat. The more precise term for this is ectothermic, relying on external sources like the sun to keep warm. Unfortunately, ectothermic is not as cool sounding a term as cold-blooded. Neither is whatever the current temperature is blooded. So that's why cold-blooded remains the kind of default term, and while imprecise, it does get the point across, and you may hear me slip into this term here and there in this video. I'm not sorry. Have you ever wondered why your reptile eats so little compared to a similar-sized mammal? Pirate Pete, my bearded dragon, loves his food, but we only feed him a handful of veggies and some bugs a couple of times a week. A guinea pig, roughly the same size, needs near constant access to hay to eat, along with like 3 to 4 times as much fresh greens daily. Tassara, my doom rose boa, weighs about 30 pounds, and she eats an extra large rat every 3 months-ish. And barring being pregnant, she has maintained her weight pretty consistently throughout her 4 years with us. My cat Oscar only weighs 23 pounds.
Only?
Yeah. But by eating twice a day takes roughly the same calories in a day as Tassara does in 3 months. Now, Oscar can stand to lose just a little bit of heft and would benefit from a little less food, but still, the delta in calories is huge. Why is that? Well, you might have guessed, given the topic of this video, or even just already knew, is that Oscar is a warm-blooded or endothermic animal. He, like you and me, assuming you're not one of the lizard people, giraffes, donkeys, guinea pigs, most mammals actually, really generate our own body heat using energy from our food. Depending on size, mammals use between 60 to 90% of the energy we take in just to maintain our body heat. The smaller the mammal, the more energy goes into heat it. A mouse or squirrel is at the 90% figure. An elephant is probably closer to 60%. That is huge. We also have mechanisms to cool us down if we get too hot. That requires energy to use and maintain. While this gives us better flexibility to exist in a broad range of environments or move seamlessly from one environment to the next without issue, we don't even come close to the efficiency of our scaly friends. But just because reptiles don't generate their own heat doesn't mean that they don't need it. Their body systems, just like ours, rely on certain temperature ranges to work optimally, or at all. So when they need that heat, what's a chilly lizard to do? Find it. Reptiles do need to do a bit of work to find the right spot to get the right temperature to function best. Based on what they need at that time, there are often options to get what they need, and reptiles will take advantage of what's available at that time. But most reptiles do have a preferred way to get toast. Heliotherms are those that primarily depend on sunlight to heat up. Think of them as solar-powered animals. Without sunlight, they're usually just not functioning at full capacity. These are your classic sunbathing reptiles like most iguanas, or bearded dragons, or garter snakes are another great example. They love basking in a sunbeam so much. Others are thigmotherms, who prefer to absorb heat from contact with warm surfaces, like rocks or soil. You know those heated rocks people sometimes put in their reptiles' enclosures? Yeah, those are for thigmothermic reptiles. Although I should point out that those heated rocks are notorious for being unreliable and even causing serious burns, so just try to avoid them. A heat mat with a thermostat, even some stacked up rocks under a basking light, then you can get the best of both worlds, is a much better option. A lot of snakes and skinks really seem to prefer that belly heat, like 5-lined skinks and ball pythons. Crepuscular or nocturnal reptiles use this strategy a lot, waking up as the sun is going down to soak up some residual heat from some of the rocks and other surfaces before setting out to do their thing. In either case, reptiles are basically professional sunbathers, either getting solar energy right from the tap by basking, or soaking up warmth from rocks or the ground, heated by solar radiation. This isn't about getting warm for the sake of comfort, like Beckett napping in a sunbeam. This is about functionality. When they are too cold, their metabolism slows down, their muscles don't work as efficiently, and basically, they turn into a lizard or noodle-shaped paperweight. In fact, should they get too cold, they become effectively paralyzed. Residents of South Florida get to see this firsthand when they get an unusual cold snap and iguanas start falling out of trees because they can no longer hold on. Getting warm enough is imperative, not only to be able to hunt or forage or to be able to evade predators, but for bodily systems like digestion, immune response, and cognitive function. It's a big deal. Of course, there's a flip side to basking or belly heating. If reptiles stay in the sun for too long, they risk overheating. And let me tell you, overheating for a reptile is no joke. For mammals, we can sweat or pant to dissipate heat. Reptiles do not have that option. Some will gape or hold their mouth open, but that's just about it. So instead, reptiles need to move and cool off by seeking out a shady spot, or a medium like a bit of water or a cool rock that can act as a heat sink and absorb some of that heat out of the reptile. All of this work just to balance their temperature is called behavioral thermoregulation, a never-ending quest to find the perfect thermostat setting. As you know, not all reptiles live in the same kind of environment, which means they all have different thermoregulation strategies. Desert reptiles like Gila monsters or Uromastyx have to survive extreme heat during the day and extreme cold in the night. They spend the hottest hours in the burrows or under rocks to stay cool, and then they come out when the temperature is just right. What a bunch of Goldilocks.
Really?
Yeah.
Alright, that was okay. Alright.
You weren't expecting that.
No, because you've written better jokes.
I think it was good.
Alright.
And you weren't expecting that, so...
Sure.
On the other hand, rainforest reptiles have it made in the shade. Literally. Their world is humid and warm pretty much all the time, so they don't have to bask as often. But they still thermoregulate using the dense canopy or water sources to cool off when things get a little too toasty. So what about our scaly buddies in captivity? Well, if you have a reptile or are thinking of getting a reptile, you probably did some research or heard talk about temperature requirements or hot side and cold side. That all relates to creating the appropriate temperature gradient. The reptiles in our care depend on us to provide them with the proper condition, and one single temperature is not enough. As we learned, reptiles actively move through their environment to hit the right temp for their needs at that moment. Snake just ate, well, it needs higher temps to help digest. Fighting a bit of an infection or feeling frisky, again, higher temperatures might be desired. Maybe it's the time of year where in the wild they'd be brumating, a lower temperature might be needed, or they just want to go to bed. A cooler temp again, etc., etc. So this is why a gradient is so important, so that no matter what temperature they want, there is a safe place in their enclosure that's in that range for them to go to while they still feel secure. That's why typically you will see a heat source on one side of the tank where the temperature will be the highest, and it gradually cools more as you move to the other side. Temperature gradients aren't just a left and right kind of thing. An often overlooked aspect, especially among newer keepers, is the vertical space in the enclosure. Remember, heat rises, so even on the cool side, the air or surfaces higher above the ground are probably going to be a little bit warmer. Having branches that extend into this space, or piles of rocks or sticks under the heat lamp and on the cold side, will provide different temperature zones, giving your scaly friend more options to thermoregulate. In more vertical-oriented enclosures, your temp gradient may not have a left to right gradient at all. It could be up and down instead. For example, one of my Macklets pythons, Hobbs, lives in a 5x5 by 8 foot enclosure. So his gradient is almost entirely vertical. When he wants to heat up, he goes to the top of his house. He's got multiple ledges and branches and shelves all the way up and down, from the coolest area at the bottom to the hottest at the top. He moves from spot to spot up and down the enclosure throughout the day to stay at his preferred temperature. I also have a very small heat mat at the bottom just to make sure that his cool side doesn't get too cool, especially in the winter. But generally speaking, his gradient is all up and down. Understanding the need for a gradient and adjusting their living environment to take advantage of this will help you optimize the care of your reptile. You want to give them their best life, right? So give them as many options as you can. If you've watched my channel for any length of time, you probably know I'm a big proponent of bigger is better when it comes to reptile homes. I try to give my animals the biggest space I can when I can, obviously. It's weird to me that this used to be a bit of a hot take in the past. What? Thankfully now, though, it's pretty much accepted as the best practice for most situations. Bigger enclosures is usually talked about in the context of enrichment, mental or physical, and it totally is. Yeah, that's a great reason, but it is also valuable as a means to creating a robust temperature gradient. Here's an example. This is a small 10-gallon enclosure. There's a 25-watt bulb that's been on there for 5 hours. I've got 6 thermostats here measuring their temps. Let's look at the options we have for reptile looking for the right temp. Ignore that and ignore the back of this piece of paper. The hottest spot in the enclosure is 82.9 degrees Fahrenheit, and the coolest is 75.3. That puts only 7.6 degrees difference between the highest and coolest temps. Okay, now let's go look at a 40-gallon with a 100-watt bulb. 4 times the size enclosure, 4 times the wattage, right? Same 6 sensors, and what do we have? Well, the hottest part is 105.8 degrees Fahrenheit, and the coldest is 71.5. That makes a 34.3 degree variance.
Wait, hold that up. That's right. Okay.
That's so much better. That's probably way too loud. I'm so sorry. That's so much better with the 40-gallon tank. There are so many more options for your animal to feel comfortable. Now, I know that this isn't like super scientific or anything like that. It's just a proof of concept to demonstrate. That's all. And I think it does a pretty good job of that. Your animal will get way more options with the bigger enclosure because you can create a broader range of temperatures, as we just demonstrated. But the amount of space in each zone is also bigger, meaning that your reptile will have an easier time fitting all of themselves into their preferred temperature zone. It's important to make sure that there is adequate cover for your reptile to feel secure too, and there are circumstances where it might not be ideal, but generally speaking, for most reptiles, you're best served giving your animal as big an enclosure as possible. Not just for enrichment, but for optimal thermoregulation options too. One last thing before we wrap up. I mentioned at the top of this video that most reptiles are ectothermic, implying that there are some that are, like us, endothermic or warm-blooded. Well, I won't leave you in suspense any longer. Yes, there are many warm-blooded reptiles, the biggest and most obvious group being birds. Birds are all warm-blooded and are all reptiles. They are archosaurs, the same group of reptiles that contains crocodiles and alligators and all those dinosaurs that went extinct a few years back. You remember that, right? It was kind of a big thing, but you've also got some species of pythons, tegus, leatherback sea turtles, and others that are seasonally, reproductively endothermic, meaning they are warm-blooded around mating season or while incubating eggs. Pythons accomplish this primarily through shivering. Leatherback sea turtles use their blood vessels as heat exchangers, and tegus, well, we don't actually know how they go about doing this, which is really cool and something for us to figure out in the future. So there you have it. Thermoregulation is the secret to a happy, healthy reptile. Whether they're soaking up rays or chilling in the shade or finding that perfect rock to lay on, reptiles are masters of balancing their body temperature with their environment. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'd like to extend my thanks to my friends on Patreon who helped me make all of this possible. You guys are the best. Please go to patreon.com/allcanadianreptilegirl to see all the ways that you can lend your support and get access to all sorts of perks and extra content. Thanks to you all for watching, hitting that like button, and subscribing. You did all that too, yeah? Of course you did. That notification button helps me out a ton and helps make sure that you don't miss any of my awesome content. And until next time, remember to nurture all nature. Now, I'm off to go and bask under a heat lamp because I'm cold all the time. Bye!
Pants? Sweater? Shoes?